The Montana wind didn't just bite, it cut through bone and spirit alike. Snow swirled violently, blanketing the jagged mountains in a white that seemed endless, unforgiving, and eternal. On the porch of the Hawthorne Ranch, Lucas Hawthorne stood with frozen hands wrapped around a chipped tin mug, staring at the horizon as if the mountains themselves might whisper a solution to the relentless weight pressing on him. 3 years. 3 years since Clara had died. 3 years since the accident on the icy barn steps had ripped laughter, warmth, and light from the halls of his home. And yet here he remained, gritting his teeth, tending to a dying ranch, and burying the loneliness that had grown like frost over his soul. The ranch had been in his family for generations, a sprawling patch of snow-kissed land, rugged hills, and stubborn cattle that refused to yield. And now, like the frigid winter air, it seemed to be slipping away from him. Fences sagged under the weight of ice, barns threatened to crumble, and creditors' letters piled up beside the fireplace he hadn't used in months. Lucas had tried to survive alone. He had tried to numb himself with work, early mornings, and endless nights of solitude. But even the land, harsh, indifferent, yet loyal in its way, seemed to mock him. This ranch isn't just land, he thought bitterly. It's all that's left of a life I loved and a family I lost. And that's when the idea had come to him. An idea half-baked, desperate, and perhaps foolish. A Christmas bride. Someone to share the house, the burdens, even a flicker of warmth. He hadn't expected much. Companionship, nothing more. Perhaps a kind face, a steady presence, someone who would tiptoe and numb the grief that had rooted itself so stubbornly in him. He hadn't expected. Eliza Monroe. The first sight of her sliced through the blizzard like a flare of fire. She moved through the storm with a confidence that defied the icy winds, auburn hair peeking from beneath a woolen hat, eyes sharp and alive despite the freezing cold. There was a certain light in her expression, as if she carried a secret fire capable of melting the harshest winter. Lucas froze. His heart, long dulled by grief, skipped a beat. "Mr. Hawthorne?" Her voice rang clear, cutting through the howl of the wind, steady and warm. "Yes, you must be," he began, almost unsure of himself. "Eliza Monroe," she said, extending her gloved hand with firm confidence. "I'm here to help you save this place." Lucas blinked. "Save this place?" he echoed, a spark of confusion and something else flickering in his chest. He had pictured a gentle, demure woman, someone who would smile politely, tidy the house, maybe warm the cold air with her presence, not someone who seemed capable of taking charge of his entire life and perhaps the ranch itself. Eliza's gaze swept across the snow-dusted barns, the broken fences, the frozen cattle. Her voice was soft but firm. "This ranch, it's been neglected, but I see potential here, and I think I can help you bring it back to life." There was an authority in her words, a quiet command that Lucas had not anticipated. It made him uneasy and inexplicably intrigued. The wind howled louder, snow lashing against his coat, yet Lucas found himself stepping closer. There was something in the way she stood, unafraid, unyielding, almost fierce, that challenged him, provoked him, and made his heart race in ways he hadn't felt since Clara. "Come inside," he said finally, his voice gruff, masking the strange flutter in his chest. "The wind will freeze you if you stay out there any longer." Inside, the fire crackled, casting warm light over the modest, rustic home. Eliza set down her bag and removed her gloves, brushing snow from her sleeves. She looked around with keen eyes, noticing every crack in the walls, every worn plank in the floor, every sign of neglect and despair. "This place, it's lonely," she said softly, almost to herself. Then, with a subtle but knowing smile, she looked at him. "But it doesn't have to be." Lucas felt a strange ache. He had expected loneliness to remain his only companion this Christmas. He had expected an unremarkable woman, someone quiet and timid. Instead, he had a woman whose presence seemed to demand attention, whose confidence hinted at hidden talents and unspoken strength, whose fire was enough to thaw even the coldest winter of his heart. And as the storm raged outside and the fire crackled inside, Lucas realized something terrifying and exhilarating. This Christmas, his life might change in ways he could never have imagined. She could save the ranch,
or she could steal his heart entirely. And somehow, deep in his chest,
he wanted both. The morning after Eliza's arrival dawned crisp and clear, the Montana sun glinting off the snow-covered hills like 1,000 tiny diamonds. Lucas Hawthorne was already up, surveying the ranch with old Tom at his side. He had expected a quiet, domestic companion, someone to brew coffee, keep the house warm, and nod politely at the hardships of ranch life. Instead, he had a woman who seemed ready to challenge both the land and him. Eliza was already outside, boots crunching against the snow, examining the fences with a critical eye. She was bundled in layers, yet the way she moved, confident, precise, made it clear she was unafraid of the elements. Lucas had to admit, grudgingly, that she was a sight to behold. Every movement, every glance radiated determination, strength, and a quiet grace that stirred something long dormant inside him. "Good morning," she called, her voice carrying across the cold air. "I thought I'd start with the north pasture. Those fences won't fix themselves." Lucas's brow furrowed. You can do that?" She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I can, and I can do a lot more than that. But first things first. If the cattle get out, we lose more than time, we lose money, and I intend to make sure that doesn't happen." Old Tom chuckled behind him. "Well, she's not wrong, Lucas. That girl's got fire." Lucas didn't respond. He merely watched as Eliza approached the fences, her gloved hands checking each post, each latch, her touch confident and sure. When she reached the corner where the old gate sagged, she tugged and adjusted it, then stepped back to examine her work. The result was immediate. The fence looked sturdier, straighter, as if her very presence had mended it. Lucas felt an unexpected pang of admiration and something else he hadn't felt in years: hope. By mid-morning, the herd of cattle had been rounded up, guided safely into the barn. Lucas had expected this to be tedious work, but Eliza moved with an instinctive ease, her hands firm yet gentle, her commands precise. She whispered to the horses in tones so soft it was almost a secret, and yet they obeyed her without hesitation. Lucas found himself watching her, heart racing with a strange combination of awe and something far more personal. The woman he had thought would be timid and fragile was vibrant, fearless, and astonishingly competent. "You talk to them like they understand you," he said, leaning against the barn door. Eliza glanced at him, cheeks flushed from exertion and cold. "They do. You just have to listen, not order." Lucas felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet recognition that perhaps this woman was unlike anyone he had ever met. She was not just helping him save the ranch, she was awakening something inside him that he had thought lost forever. That evening, after a long day in the snow, Lucas found himself standing in the kitchen, watching as Eliza worked over a pot of stew. The aroma was rich and comforting, but it wasn't the food that held his attention. It was the subtle way she moved, confident, natural, her auburn hair catching the lamplight in soft waves. She glanced up and caught his gaze, smiling faintly. "Hungry?" Lucas nodded, clearing his throat. "Yeah, the work outside. I didn't realize how much how tiring it is." Eliza laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes in a quiet courtyard. "You'll get used to it, or you'll learn to rely on me." He felt a rush of warmth at her words, a flutter of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. His grief, his loneliness, all the walls he had built, they felt fragile in her presence, as though she could see right through him. "I didn't expect you," he admitted, almost in a whisper. "I thought you'd be different." Eliza raised an eyebrow, smirking playfully. "Different? How so? Delicate and useless in the snow?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Something like that." Her laughter rang again, and for the first time in years, Lucas felt his heart lighten. But even as the fire crackled and the snow fell gently outside, tension was brewing. Word had spread in the small town about the new bride at Hawthorne Ranch, and not everyone was pleased. Some whispered about Lucas's desperation, others doubted Eliza's abilities, and a few, jealous of her beauty and confidence, plotted to test her. Lucas, however, was unaware of the rumors. He was focused solely on her hands, her eyes, her presence, and he realized, with a mix of fear and exhilaration, that he was beginning to feel something far more dangerous than friendship, something that, if admitted, might change everything between them. That night, as the wind howled and the snow piled higher against the windows, Lucas found himself lingering by the fire long after Eliza had retired. He thought of her fire and confidence, her gentle humor, and the way her eyes had looked at him that morning while guiding the cattle. He wondered, if this woman could save the ranch, could she also save him? The next morning, a letter arrived, torn and frostbitten from the neighboring ranch. Trouble had already begun. Some of Lucas's cattle had wandered into the neighbor's property, and the storm threatened to worsen. It would take more than muscle to save them. Eliza, standing at the edge of the snow-dusted field, looked back at Lucas, her eyes daring him to follow. "We either save the ranch together, or we lose it all." Lucas's chest tightened. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. Whatever storms awaited, inside or out, he knew he would not face them alone. And for the first time in years, the future felt alive. The morning sun rose weakly behind thick clouds, casting pale light over the snow-covered Hawthorne Ranch. Lucas Hawthorne had already saddled the horses, the bitter wind biting through his coat and the snow crunching beneath his boots. Something in the air felt wrong, too cold, too heavy, too quiet. Old Tom muttered warnings about the storm rolling in faster than the forecasts predicted, but Lucas barely heard him. Eliza was already outside, bundled in her thick coat, scarf tucked around her neck, eyes sharp and alert. She was kneeling beside a broken fence post, working quickly to secure it. "We've got a problem," she called without looking up. "Some of the north herd got spooked last night. If the storm hits harder, they could be in trouble." Lucas swallowed hard, feeling the familiar tightening of fear in his chest. He had worried about this exact scenario. The snowstorm was coming, and if the cattle were scattered, it could mean ruin. "Then we fix it," he said gruffly, mounting his horse. His voice carried both command and a hint of desperation. Eliza looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear there, only determination, and something else. Something that made his heart thrum in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Together," she said softly. The wind picked up, howling around them as they rode through knee-deep snow toward the north pasture. Visibility was almost zero, but Eliza moved with a confidence that astounded Lucas. She called to the cattle in low, musical tones, and one by one they responded, turning back toward the barn. Lucas felt a mixture of awe and attraction. She was commanding, fearless, and brilliant, a force of nature all her own. He wanted to reach out, brush the snow from her cheek, tell her that she was extraordinary. But there was no time. The storm was rising, the herd was scattered, and the ranch's survival hung in the balance. Hours passed like minutes, the two of them working seamlessly together. Lucas found himself stealing glances at her whenever he could, at the way her hair whipped around her face, at the fierce determination in her eyes, at the small smile she gave a frightened calf as she guided it back. By the time the last cow was safely in the barn, both were soaked, freezing, and exhausted, but there was a fire in Lucas's chest that no winter could extinguish. "I don't know how you do it," he admitted, leaning against the barn door. I thought I was alone in this. I thought I'd lose everything." Eliza's breath came in short puffs, snow clinging to her eyelashes. "You weren't alone, and you're not losing anything, not while I'm here." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her close and tell her everything, the grief, the loneliness, the fear he carried. But the storm outside mirrored the storm of emotions inside him, fierce and... That evening, the storm raged in full force. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind threatened to shake the house apart. Lucas and Eliza sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, the air thick with the silence of shared exhaustion. Eliza poured 2 mugs of hot cocoa, the steam rising between them. She handed one to Lucas, their fingers brushing lightly. He felt a jolt, a spark he hadn't felt in years, and he looked up to meet her gaze. "You're incredible," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone handle things the way you do." Eliza's cheeks flushed, a soft smile playing at her lips. "You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Hawthorne," she teased gently. "For someone who spends most of his life staring at the ground or his cattle, you're not half bad at listening." Lucas laughed, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed hearing himself make. Listening, huh? I guess I'm learning from the best. For a moment, the storm outside faded, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the warmth between them. Lucas could feel her presence, every subtle movement, every glance, every sigh. His hands itched to brush her hair from her face, to pull her close, to tell her she belonged here, with him, in this house, on this ranch. Eliza's eyes softened, and she leaned slightly toward him. There was tension in the air, thick and undeniable, the kind that made hearts race and breaths shallow. But before either of them could act, a loud crash from the barn interrupted the moment. They rushed to the barn, only to find that a section of the roof had collapsed under the weight of snow. A few of the livestock were trapped, panic-stricken. Lucas felt his stomach twist, but Eliza was already moving, her hands steady and sure as she guided the frightened animals to safety. "We've got this," she said firmly, her voice calm even in chaos. "Follow me and stay close to the calves. They'll panic if they see you struggling." Lucas followed her, his heart pounding, not just from fear, but from admiration, from desire, from the realization that he was falling for her. She was fearless, brilliant, and alive in a way that made his pulse quicken. By the time the last animal was safe, both were covered in sweat and snow, hearts racing. Lucas grabbed her hand impulsively, holding it tight. "Eliza, I don't know what I'd do without you." She looked at him, eyes wide, lips parted slightly. "You don't have to find out," she whispered. And in that moment, Lucas felt the storm inside him calm just a little, replaced by a fierce, consuming warmth he couldn't name. That night, after the barn was cleared and the animals settled, Lucas found himself standing outside, staring at the stars peeking through the dissipating storm. Eliza joined him, shoulder brushing his, warmth radiating despite the cold. "We survived," she said softly. "We did," I agreed, his voice low. "But I think I've survived more than just the storm. I think I've survived loneliness." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw something dangerous, something thrilling, something that promised love, fire, and redemption. The snow settled around them like a blanket, the ranch quiet for the first time in years. And as Lucas took her hand in his, he realized this Christmas had already given him far more than he had ever hoped for. But he didn't know yet that the hardest trials and the deepest passions.
We're still waiting. The morning after the blizzard left the Montana mountains draped in sparkling white, Hawthorne Ranch looked reborn. Snow blanketed every fence, every barn, and the hills beyond, making the world seem quiet, still, and impossibly beautiful. Lucas Hawthorne stood on the porch, watching the sunlight dance across the snow, a rare smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Eliza Monroe emerged from the barn, carrying a bundle of firewood with effortless grace. Snowflakes clung to her hair, and her cheeks were flushed from exertion, giving her a natural radiance that took Lucas's breath away. "Morning," he said, his voice rough but warm. She glanced up, eyes sparkling. "Morning. Looks like the storm left us a little extra work, but nothing we can't handle." Lucas felt a rush of admiration. She moved with such quiet authority, yet there was an elegance to her, a subtle femininity that tugged at something deep inside him. He wanted to reach out, brush the snow from her hair, and see if she would let him, but he held himself back, watching her from the porch like a man enchanted. The day was spent repairing fences, clearing snowdrifts, and tending to the livestock. Lucas had expected hard work, but he hadn't expected the ingenuity Eliza brought to every task. When they reached the frozen water troughs, she didn't just thaw them, she rigged a simple pulley system to keep the water flowing, saving hours of labor each day. "I never would have thought of that," Lucas admitted, watching the clever mechanism in awe. Eliza smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Sometimes you just have to think ahead. It's not magic, it's observation, patience, and a little stubbornness." Lucas chuckled. "That explains why you survived a blizzard better than I did." She leaned on the fence, snow melting off her coat, and laughed softly. That sound, light and musical, made something in him ache, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Clara. By evening, they were both exhausted, covered in snow and sweat, but Lucas found himself drawn to her as though by an invisible thread. Inside, the ranch smelled of pine and wood smoke, a comforting warmth that contrasted sharply with the frigid world outside. Eliza settled near the fireplace with a book she had found in the cabin, but Lucas couldn't focus on anything except the curve of her lips, the tilt of her head, and the way the firelight danced across her eyes. "You've done more than save the ranch this week," he said, quietly, almost reverently. Eliza's head lifted, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Saved you?" "Yes," he whispered, taking a cautious step closer. "I was lost. I thought I was done with hope, done with life as I knew it. But you've shown me there's still a future worth fighting for." Her breath hitched slightly, and she set the book aside. "Lucas, Before she could finish, a howl of wind rattled the windows. It reminded them both that the world outside was still harsh, unforgiving, and unpredictable. Yet, in that quiet moment, standing close to her, Lucas felt the first real spark of something neither snow nor storm could freeze.
As he reached out, their hands brushed. Sparks seemed to fly, and neither pulled away. Lucas's voice was rough with emotion. "Eliza, I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't feel this." Eliza's eyes softened, and without a word, she closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a gentle, searching kiss, timid at first, then deeper, more certain, as if the weeks of tension, admiration, and quiet longing had been building to this single, inevitable moment. When they finally pulled back, both were breathless. Lucas rested his forehead against hers. You're incredible," he murmured. "So are you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The fire crackled behind them, the ranch silent, the snow outside untouched. For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to believe that perhaps love wasn't just a memory. It could be found again, even in the harshest winter, even in the coldest heart. The next morning brought news that tempered their romantic reprieve. A neighboring rancher, jealous and calculating, had let rumors spread about the new bride at Hawthorne Ranch. Some townsfolk doubted Eliza's abilities, calling her a city woman who would fail in the harsh Montana winters. Lucas's jaw tightened as he read the note left at the porch. "Ranchers who don't know the land don't belong here. Watch your herd." Eliza, standing beside him, put a hand on his arm. "Let them talk. We know the truth, and we'll prove them wrong." Lucas looked down at her, admiration and desire mixing with a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. You're incredible," he murmured. "So are you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The fire crackled behind them, the ranch silent, the snow outside untouched. For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to believe that perhaps love wasn't just a memory. It could be found again, even in the harshest winter, even in the coldest heart. The next morning brought news that tempered their romantic reprieve. A neighboring rancher, jealous and calculating, had let rumors spread about the new bride at Hawthorne Ranch. Some townsfolk doubted Eliza's abilities, calling her a city woman who would fail in the harsh Montana winters. Lucas's jaw tightened as he read the note left at the porch. "Ranchers who don't know the land don't belong here. Watch your herd." Eliza, standing beside him, put a hand on his arm. "Let them talk. We know the truth, and we'll prove them wrong." Lucas looked down at her, admiration and desire mixing with a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. You're incredible," he murmured. "So are you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The fire crackled behind them, the ranch silent, the snow outside untouched. For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to believe that perhaps love wasn't just a memory. It could be found again, even in the harshest winter, even in the coldest heart. As night fell, the wind moaned across the mountains, and the snow piled higher against the windows. Lucas watched Eliza move about the cabin, tending to the fire and preparing for the coming days. He realized that this Christmas he had found far more than a bride. He had found a partner, a confidant, a woman whose fire matched his own, and whose courage had already begun to change his life and his heart. But outside, the world remained unpredictable, and the whispers of doubt, envy, and challenge promised that their greatest trials and their most passionate moments were still ahead. Lucas stepped closer to her, fingers brushing hers, and whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." Eliza looked up at him, her lips curving into a confident, knowing smile. "Together. The mountains, silent and eternal, seemed to approve, and for the first time, Lucas believed that love, fire, and hope could survive even the harshest winter.
The snow had begun to settle into a soft, glistening blanket over Hawthorne Ranch, but inside, the warmth of the cabin was electric. Lucas Hawthorne stood by the window, hands tucked into his coat, watching Eliza move through the barnyard with confidence and ease. She wasn't just helping, she was leading. Every gesture, every command, every small action seemed to breathe life back into the struggling ranch. "I can't believe how fast she's turning this place around," old Tom muttered, standing behind him. "I've been on this ranch 30 years, and I had never seen it done like this." Lucas didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on Eliza as she coaxed a stubborn calf into the pen, her gentle voice carrying over the crisp morning air. His chest tightened, not from admiration alone, but from a growing, undeniable pull in his heart. After the cattle were secured, Eliza walked over to Lucas, cheeks flushed from the cold and excitement. "I've been thinking," she said, breath visible in the frosty air. "We can't just survive on the ranch. We need to thrive, and I have an idea that could help us." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." She smiled, a mix of pride and mischief in her eyes. "We can start a winter horse guiding program. Tourists come every year for sleigh rides, horseback tours, and mountain experiences. If we manage it right, it could bring in enough money to repair fences, barns, and even expand our herd." Lucas blinked. For a moment, he felt a mixture of skepticism and awe. That actually makes sense. Eliza's smile widened. "I didn't just come here to help with chores, Mr. Hawthorne. I came here to save this place, and maybe even change both our lives." Lucas felt a warmth spread through him, not from the fire, but from the woman standing before him, daring and brilliant. That evening, after the work was done, Lucas found himself in the kitchen with Eliza. She was preparing dinner, steam rising from the pots, and he watched her silently, captivated. "Lucas?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Yeah?" She tilted her head, her eyes softening. "You've been quiet all day." "I've just been thinking," he admitted, stepping closer. "Thinking about us." Eliza paused, the knife in her hand hovering over the vegetables. Her heart skipped a beat as he moved closer, hands brushing against hers. "Us?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, voice low and filled with raw emotion. "I don't know how to say it, but I can't imagine this ranch or my life without you." Eliza's breath hitched. She had felt it too, the pull, the warmth, the undeniable connection. She set down the knife, stepping closer until their bodies almost touched. "Lucas, I feel the same way." He cupped her face in his hands, eyes searching hers for permission, for certainty. When she nodded slightly, he leaned in, kissing her softly at first, then deeper, more urgently, as if the months of tension, longing, and admiration needed release. The fire crackled behind them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the warmth of their kiss created a sanctuary that no storm could breach. The next morning brought a new obstacle. A rival rancher, jealous of the attention and success Hawthorne Ranch was beginning to gain, spread rumors about Eliza's abilities. Some townsfolk whispered that she was a fraud, that a city woman could never manage a Montana ranch, especially not in the dead of winter. Lucas felt a surge of protectiveness. He didn't respond to the gossip immediately, but his eyes met Eliza's. "Ignore them," she said, her voice steady. "We know the truth, Lucas. We've got this." And they did. Together, they implemented the winter horse guiding idea, repairing fences, clearing trails, and creating a small but inviting winter experience for tourists. The first group of visitors arrived, and Lucas watched, stunned, as Eliza managed the horses, guided the sleighs, and handled every situation with grace, patience, and authority. Guests left impressed, leaving tips and praise that slowly began to fill the coffers of the struggling ranch. Lucas couldn't stop watching her. Her confidence, her warmth, her brilliance, it all captivated him. And as the last guests rode off into the snowy evening, he stepped close to her. "You've done more than save this ranch, Eliza," he murmured. "You saved me, too." Her eyes softened, and she leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "And you've given me a life I never imagined I could have."
That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Lucas and Eliza sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa. The ranch lay peaceful beneath the snow, but both knew the challenges weren't over. Yet in that quiet moment, they allowed themselves to imagine a future together, one filled with hope, love, and shared purpose. "Lucas," Eliza whispered, lifting her head to meet his gaze, "whatever comes next, promise me we'll face it together." "Always," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "I won't let anything come between us. Not this ranch, not the storms, not anyone." The wind moaned outside, snow drifting silently against the windows, but inside, the fire blazed, the air was warm, and for the first time in years, Lucas Hawthorne felt complete, not just as a rancher, but as a man in love, ready to face any challenge together with Eliza. The wind had returned with a vengeance, rattling the cabins and bending the pine trees on Hawthorne Ranch. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, and Lucas Hawthorne's heart raced with both fear and anticipation. This was no ordinary winter storm. It was a beast, testing everything he had worked for, everything he had fought to preserve. Eliza Monroe stood beside him on the porch, scarf tight around her neck, eyes sharp and unwavering. Her auburn hair clung to her cheeks flushed from cold and determination. She didn't flinch at the wind. She didn't hesitate at the danger. "Lucas," she called over the roar of the blizzard. "The North herd, they're moving again. We have to act, now." He swallowed hard, gripping the reins of his horse. "Lead the way," he said, letting her take the front, trusting her instincts completely. Old Tom followed behind them, grumbling about the weather, but even he knew this was not the time to doubt Eliza's abilities. She had already proven herself indispensable, and now she would prove that she could save the ranch in a crisis. Racing against the blizzard. They reached the north pasture just in time to see the cattle huddling against the wind, panic spreading through the herd. Visibility was near zero, snow whipping their faces, and the threat of losing several head of cattle was imminent. Eliza moved like a conductor of chaos, her voice calm and commanding. "Keep them together. Calm the calves first." Lucas felt a surge of admiration and something more personal as he watched her coax the animals with a mixture of firmness and gentleness. She whispered to the lead cows, clapped and stomped to guide strays, and even managed to soothe the frightened horse that had broken loose. "I don't know how you do it," Lucas shouted, struggling against the wind as he guided the others. "Focus on the ones near you," Eliza called back. "I've got the rest." Within moments, the herd was under control, moving steadily toward the barn. Lucas's chest heaved, not just from exertion, but from admiration, pride, and the growing realization that he was deeply, irrevocably in love with this woman. Once the cattle were safely inside, Lucas and Eliza returned to the warmth of the cabin, drenched, frozen, but triumphant. Old Tom shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen a lot in my years, but I've never seen anyone run a herd like that, city girl or not." Eliza laughed softly, removing her gloves, and for a moment they stood in silence, catching their breath. Lucas stepped closer, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You were amazing out there," he murmured. "We were amazing," she replied, her voice soft, eyes locking on his.
As the snow settled into soft drifts outside, Lucas and Eliza sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, leaning into each other. The blizzard had tested their strength, their courage, and their bond, but it had also solidified it. Lucas brushed his thumb over her cheek, heart pounding. "I don't want this Christmas to end," he murmured. Eliza rested her head on his shoulder, warmth radiating between them. "Then let's make every day worth it. Together." Outside, the mountains were silent under the snow, majestic and eternal. Inside, a love had taken root that no storm could extinguish, a partnership forged in fire, frost, and unyielding courage. And for Lucas Hawthorne, for the first time in years, the future was no longer uncertain. It was theirs. The Montana sun rose over Hawthorne Ranch, casting golden light on the snow-covered fields and sparkling icicles that clung to the barns. For the first time in years, the ranch looked not just alive, but thriving. Fences had been repaired, barns reinforced, cattle secure, and even the trails cleared for winter tours. Every corner of the property bore the mark of two hands working together, Lucas's strength and determination, and Eliza's brilliance, courage, and unrelenting heart. Lucas stood on the porch surveying the land when he saw her approaching. Eliza, her cheeks rosy from the cold, carrying a basket filled with fresh eggs and homemade bread. She paused, eyes meeting his, and in that look was everything: partnership, trust, love, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine before. "Morning," she called, voice warm despite the crisp air. "Morning," he replied, his chest tightening as he watched her stride across the snow toward him. After months of tension, long days of hard labor, and nights of quiet longing, their love had become undeniable. That morning, Lucas took her hand in his, pulling her close. "Eliza," he whispered, eyes searching hers. "This ranch, this life, it's everything I've ever wanted. But more than that, it's you. I don't just need you here. I want you, every day, every moment, with me." Eliza's breath caught, and she smiled softly. "Lucas, I feel the same. You've given me a life I never imagined. I can't imagine it without you." He reached into his coat pocket and drew a small, simple ring, holding it out to her. Snow glinted on its surface, catching the morning light. "Will you stay with me? Forever?" he asked, his voice low, trembling with emotion. Tears sprang to her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak at first. Then, finally, she whispered, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Lucas slid the ring onto her finger, and as he pulled her into his arms, the world seemed to hold its breath. The stormy winter, the trials of the ranch, the whispers of doubt, they were all behind them now. All that remained was warmth, love, and the promise of tomorrow. Word of the Hawthorne Ranch's revival spread quickly. Visitors praised the tours, neighbors marveled at the ingenuity and resilience of Lucas and Eliza, and even the doubters in town were forced to admit that the city bride had transformed not just a ranch, but a life. Old Tom shook his head, grinning. "I've seen a lot in my time, but this is something special. You two, you're unstoppable together." Lucas chuckled, brushing snow from Eliza's hair. "I didn't do it alone, not for a second." Eliza leaned into him, whispering, "We did it together." And in that moment, Lucas knew it was true, not just for the ranch, but for life itself. They were partners in every... That evening, after the last sleigh ride of the day, Lucas and Eliza sat together by the fire, wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa. The cabin smelled of pine, wood smoke, and cinnamon, the cozy scent of home. Lucas brushed a stray strand of hair from Eliza's face, fingers lingering on her cheek. "I never thought Christmas could feel like this," he murmured, voice low. "I never thought I could feel this happy." Eliza leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Neither did I, but here we are, and I wouldn't change a thing." They kissed softly, tenderly, savoring the quiet intimacy that came from shared hardship, triumph, and deep love. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, warmth radiated, not just from the fire, but from their hearts entwined. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet joy. The ranch continued to thrive under their combined efforts. Tourists returned for winter sleigh rides and horse-guided tours. Neighbors came to visit, bringing admiration and respect. And through it all, Lucas and Eliza's love blossomed, growing stronger with every shared challenge, every tender moment, every whispered promise. One snowy evening, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, Lucas stood on the porch, holding Eliza's hand. "This is just the beginning," he said softly.
She smiled, eyes sparkling in the firelight. The beginning of everything. And as they watched the snow blanket their land, Lucas realized something he had never truly believed possible. The miracle of Christmas wasn't about what was given, it was about what was built together. Love, hope, courage, and a life worth living, side by side, forever. The Hawthorne Ranch had survived the storm, and so had their hearts.